Hey guys, this is Justin at the Survivor Review. Today we're talking about the newest film to star the King of the Monsters, and a very different one, seeing that it's animated and not live action. I'm of course talking about Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters, or Monster Planet, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what the exact title is. This is technically the 32nd Godzilla movie and the 30th produced by Toho. And I say technically because this was supposed to be an animated series originally that was turned into a film due to the success of Shin Godzilla. And it's also the first chapter in a trilogy of films. This movie premiered on Netflix in the US and other countries outside of Japan. And that's why if you watch it on Netflix, it counts it as like a TV series just called Godzilla. And they called this one Episode 1, Planet of the Monsters, and not like its own movie, because they're counting the entire trilogy as one long thing. Now this is the first anime film for Godzilla. It's really surprising that it took this long for there to be an anime version of Godzilla. You think those would go hand in hand, but this is the first one to do that. It's not the first ever animated version of Godzilla. There's been a couple of those in the past, but this is the first like full-length film, anime film of Godzilla. And how is it? It's solid. I'll give it that. It's a solid start to what could be a really cool trilogy, saying that like this is clearly the first part of a larger story, and you really need to go into it knowing that, not thinking this is like a standalone movie, because this really is the first chapter of a trilogy, and as it stands, it's a decent first chapter. It's flawed, definitely. It's not great, but it has a lot of good and interesting things in it. Because basically the plot of this movie is, in the late 20th century, all these monsters start showing up. All these kaiju start coming in and start destroying the world, basically. And then this one big one shows up, which is, of course, Godzilla. And he basically takes them out, almost annihilates the human race. And then this alien race comes in and helps them try to fight off Godzilla. That doesn't work out, so the aliens and the humans retreat into space to find another inhabitable world to live on. But after 20 years of doing so, they find out that they really can't find anywhere to live, and one of their only options is to go back to Earth and defeat Godzilla and live on Earth. So as you can tell by that, this is a very different kind of Godzilla movie. It doesn't feel like a typical Godzilla film at all. It's not like, oh, Godzilla's coming ashore, we gotta fight him off. It's very different than that. And at times it doesn't even feel like a Godzilla movie. It just feels like a sci-fi, like a really hardcore sci-fi anime movie. But that's not saying that in a bad way. I don't think that's a problem against the movie. Actually, I like a lot of those elements. I love the visual design of the movie. I love the look of it. All the shots in space look beautiful. It has really weird like 3D animation to it. It's like anime, but it's like CGI. And I'm not really used to that. To be honest, I'm not that big of an anime fan to begin with. Not saying I have anything against it. It's just nothing I ever really watched. So I'm not exactly familiar with the style. I'm not sure if it's ever been done in other animes before, but to me, like, at first it was kind of weird, but like I got used to it and I thought it was pretty fun. There's a lot of great action scenes. Like, the action scenes are the standout parts of this movie. The thing is, though, there's not as many of them. The problem with this movie is that there is a lot of exposition and a lot of explaining stuff, a lot of talking to kind of get to where we're going and get the audience up to speed on what's going on in this world. And there's a lot of like talking and not showing. Like the prologue, where it basically talks about the kaiju war that happened. Just hear that phrase, kaiju war. That sounds amazing. But it's just glossed over in the prologue. And it's like, oh, okay, I would have liked to have seen that. So that's kind of a flaw. There's a lot of exposition stuff in here. The characters are very one-note and very forgettable. The main guy's alright. He has some good motivation, so you buy into his story and you're okay with that. But the rest of the characters are very just throwaway, like, they're just there, which is kind of how it is in most Godzilla movies. But when you're trying to like build a trilogy of movies, like one long story, I feel like you need stronger characters to keep us invested. Like, there's aliens in the movie, but the alien characters are just fine. They're very humanoid-like, and they're just like, okay. Nothing too exciting. So there's that. And then we get to Godzilla, who I actually really liked in this movie. I like the design of him. Like, he looks weird. Like, the animation style on him is looks a little weird and strange, but like, I'm okay with it. I like that. I like the visual design of him. He looks actually really similar to the legendary Godzilla. He looks kind of similar to that design-wise. But I thought he was really cool. He actually doesn't appear in the movie a whole lot. He appears in the prologue for a little bit, and he doesn't really show up until the third act, like the climax of the film. And I know that might disappoint a lot of people. I don't mind it because, again, in the old Godzilla movies, Godzilla never really appeared a whole lot in them. So I didn't mind him not appearing throughout the film at all. In fact, his presence is actually felt throughout the entire film, since he's like the central plot point of the entire film. The whole entire movie is them going back to Earth to reclaim it from Godzilla. Like, they're constantly mentioning Godzilla. There's no other side plots in this movie. It's very just one basic, straightforward plot. So you feel the presence of Godzilla throughout the entire thing, which I really like. I actually thought that was kind of different than other Godzilla films, where, you know, the side plots kind of get in the way and all this kind of stuff. There's other monsters and they're getting in the way. This is like, every scene was like, oh yeah, Godzilla is a threat. Godzilla is just this crazy force of nature who's just out there to destroy everything. I like Toho's kind of stance on Godzilla lately of just being like, oh yeah, this guy is a complete monster. Like, he will destroy anything in his wake. Like, in Shin Godzilla, he was insane, destroying the city and everything. And then in this one, he basically takes over the planet for himself. To the point where actually, by him living on the planet for so long, because even though the humans have only been off of Earth for 20 years, they've traveled like 11 light years away from Earth. So by the time they get back to Earth, like, technically like 20,000 years has passed, basically. So it's like supposed to be way, way into the future. And Godzilla, by him just being on the planet by himself, he's basically like reformed it because of his DNA and everything. Like, yeah, there's a really interesting like take on the mythology of Godzilla in this one that I thought was really unique and really cool. And he basically has just like taken over the planet. And there's not that many monsters in the movie, which is what I was actually expecting going into it, especially with the movie being called Planet of the Monsters or Monster Planet. I was expecting a lot of monsters, and there weren't. There's only Godzilla and these other kind of winged creatures that fly around that kind of spawned off of Godzilla. So that really wasn't what I was expecting. But I like all that stuff. I like how Godzilla has transformed the planet basically through his DNA and through being around for 20,000 years. Like, that was really unique. This movie is mostly just like, it's a solid setup, but I feel like on its own it's not the greatest. It really picks up in the third act. I will say my one problem with Godzilla is the fact that he doesn't really do anything when he's on screen. When he's on screen, he's mostly just standing. That's it, really. And it just seemed really weird for like the first ever Godzilla anime, the first ever like fully animated Godzilla movie, and what they do with him is they just have him kind of stand around, and yeah, he uses his atomic breath a few times. He doesn't just like stand there still, but it's like, okay, I would have expected a little more action out of Godzilla, but I think they're saving that for the later films, especially with how this ends. I don't want to really spoil the ending, because the ending is nuts. It is amazing. But I think they're going to have more of that action in the later installments. And when it comes to action, the action scenes are actually really great in this. There's a lot of cool shots. Like I said, even though Godzilla doesn't really do much, they take full advantage of there being a CGI Godzilla with the camera work they do. And there's a lot of scenes where the characters are riding around these like kind of hover bikes. That's the only way I can explain them. Shooting at Godzilla, and you're like, the camera's following them, and they're doing like a 360 shot around Godzilla. So they take full advantage of that, of like camera angles that they would not be able to get in a live action, or even with like in a live action using a CGI model of Godzilla. They're just doing their own unique stuff, and I like all that stuff. And all the action scenes have very high energy and are engaging as hell and just really awesome. I loved all the action scenes in this movie. Like I said, the last half is where the movie totally picks up, and it's just a ton of fun. The action scenes are great. It's just like, it's a decent start. Because like I said, it's, you know, even though it's only 89 minutes and it's a very streamlined storyline, it has a lot of build-up. There's a lot of like talking, a lot of techno-babble and stuff about like the possibilities of them being able to, you know, get back into Earth orbit in time and all that kind of stuff, where it's like a lot of technical jargon. Like I said, it has weak characters. So it's not perfect by any means. I don't think it's anything I'm going to be like going back and really like rewatching. I'm going to rewatch it before the next installment comes out. But I like the world it builds. It's a very unique world, very different from anything we've really seen in Godzilla films. It really is its own thing, its own unique take on Godzilla, and I like that a lot. I like the world. I love the visual look to it. I like Godzilla, even though he doesn't move a whole lot. I like Godzilla in the movie, especially that ending, which is crazy. I did that, and I want to see where this goes. Even though I wasn't blown away by this movie, even though I didn't think it was, you know, the greatest thing out there, I really want to see where this goes, because it ends off on an interesting note, and I feel like the sequel will expand upon it. If the sequel does what I think it will, which will probably expand upon it, show more monsters, probably have more action, since everything has already really been established, you know, have more action, have more of Godzilla doing stuff, then I'm totally down for that, because I like all the stuff we got introduced to in here. It was a solid start, but not perfect. It has its flaws. So overall, Godzilla Planet of the Monsters is a solid movie. Like I said, it suffers from heavy exposition, lack of good characters, but makes up for it with a cool universe, an interesting idea, and something different. A really different take on the Godzilla franchise that I appreciate. I really like how Toho's recent output of Godzilla films, Shin Godzilla and Planet of the Monsters, have been their own kind of like new, unique takes on the character, like changing up the lore, changing up the mythology, and letting like these filmmakers do their own like version of the character. I think that's really cool and makes these two movies stand out as like unique and different. Whereas though I like them on different like levels. Like I think Shin Godzilla is actually like a great Godzilla film. This one's kind of like in the middle there. I don't really want to compare the two because they're very different kinds of films. They are kind of similar in that they have their own unique take on like Godzilla and how he evolves and how he affects the environment around him and all that kind of stuff, which is something they never really explored in previous Godzilla films. They just started doing that in these two, and I think that's very unique. They both have their own cool take on it, which is very interesting. And then I like that we have the legendary Godzilla films to kind of be the basic, like, classic back to basics, Godzilla's a monster from the sea and he has to fight other monsters type of stuff, which is not a bad thing by any means. I'm still very much looking forward to the next legendary Godzilla film. But we have that one to kind of be the classic old school Godzilla, while we have the Toho ones to kind of be like a new, interesting take on this 60-year-old franchise, and I like that. And that's what I like about Planet of the Monsters. Even though it's not the greatest, it has its flaws, I feel like it's a solid enough start to what hopefully will be a fun trilogy of movies that can hold us over until we hopefully get a Shin Godzilla sequel sometime after 2020. Thank you, Legendary Pictures. But either way, though, that's Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters. And that's about all I have to say for now. And until next time, I'll talk to you guys later.